The convoy exploded in sequence. First vehicle, third vehicle, then the lead Humvee carrying Captain Hayes. Specialist Reyna Ortiz hit the ground as rounds snapped overhead. The familiar crack thump of AK fire mixing with the deeper bark of a PK machine gun. Through the dust and smoke, she saw Hayes being dragged from the wreckage, blood streaming down his face, for insurgents hauling him toward the tree line. Her hands moved to her medical kit by instinct, but her eyes tracked angles, distances, wind speed, because Reyna Ortiz was not just a medic. She was something the Army had trained her to be, then ordered her to forget she ever was. The ambush had come exactly where it should not have been possible. Route Granite had been cleared twice that morning. Command had promised air coverage. Now the second vehicle burned, black smoke coiling into the Afghan sky, and Private Chin screamed from inside the third Humvee with a piece of shrapnel through his leg. Reyna moved without thinking. The medical training overrode everything else, even the part of her brain screaming that this was a kill zone, that she should stay down, that moving meant dying. She sprinted to the third vehicle in a crouch, her aid bag bouncing against her hip. Rounds kicked up dust 2 feet to her left. She did not slow down. Chin was 19 and crying. The shrapnel had gone clean through his thigh, missing the femoral artery by maybe an inch. Reyna pulled a tourniquet from her kit and started working. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was what Sergeant Major Hollis had said at Fort Benning 3 years ago, when she had been someone different, training for something the Army would later decide she was not allowed to be. "You have the calmest hands I have ever seen on a shooter," Hollis had told her. "You're going to save lives with those hands." He had been right, just not the way either of them had expected. The tourniquet went on tight. Chin gasped and grabbed her arm. She worked around his grip, checking his pupils, assessing for shock. 2 more wounded in the lead vehicle. Hayes was gone, disappeared into the tree line. The machine gun fire had stopped, but the silence felt worse, like the moment before something terrible. Reyna keyed her radio. "Raptor 6, this is Lifeline 2. We have 3 urgent surgical, 1 captured. Request immediate medevac and QRF." Her voice did not shake. It never shook, not during contact, not during the worst trauma she had seen in 11 months at Forward Operating Base Couchement. Some of the infantry guys called her the Ice Queen because of it. She did not care what they called her as long as they stayed alive. The response came through static. "Lifeline 2, QRF is spun up. Medevac inbound 12 mics. Establish LZ and mark casualties." 12 minutes. Chin would make it. She moved to the lead vehicle, where Corporal Davies and Staff Sergeant Kim were pulling security, their rifles trained on the tree line. Davies had blood on his face from a cut above his eye. Kim looked pale. "Anyone else hit?" Reyna said. Davies shook his head. "Hayes took the worst of it. They dragged him out before we could react." "How many?" Reyna asked. "For that I saw." Kim's voice was tight. "Maybe more in the trees. They knew exactly where to hit us." Reyna looked at the tree line. 800 meters, maybe 9. Clear line of sight from that ridge line to the west. Any competent marksman could have disabled all 3 vehicles from there, picked off the survivors one by one. But they had not. This had been a capture operation, precise and professional. They had wanted Hayes alive. She pushed the thought away and focused on treating Davies' laceration, quick butterfly closures that would hold until they got back to base. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder. The medevac bird came in fast and low, door gunners scanning for threats. Reyna loaded Chin first, then stayed with Davies and Kim while the quick reaction force vehicles rolled up, bristling with weapons and angry Marines looking for a fight they had already missed. Lieutenant Voss climbed out of the lead QRF vehicle, his uniform crisp despite the dust, his expression somewhere between annoyed and bored. He surveyed the scene with the detachment of someone reviewing paperwork. Voss was the FOB's executive officer, second in command, and he had made it clear from Reyna's first week that he considered female soldiers a liability at best and a quota-filling mistake at worst. "Casualty report," he said to Davies. 3 wounded, all stable. Captain Hayes was taken. Voss's jaw tightened. He looked at the tree line, then at his watch, then back at the burning vehicles like he was calculating the cost of the loss in fuel and replacement parts rather than human terms. How long ago? Maybe 4 minutes when I called it in, Reyna said. Voss glanced at her like he had just noticed she was there. Specialist Ortiz. You were supposed to be on base running sick call. Medical support rotates with patrol schedules, sir. Captain Hayes requested I accompany this supply run. Something moved across Voss's face, too quick to read. Of course he did. He looked back at the tree line. Which direction? Reyna pointed northwest. They moved fast. For men, maybe 5. Professional. Your opinion on their professionalism is noted, specialist. Voss turned to the QRF team leader, a hardy gunnery sergeant named Walsh. Get these vehicles secured and stripped. Anything sensitive gets back to base. I want a patrol to sweep that tree line, but I am not sending anyone into those hills. This was Haqqani network, probably across the border by now. Sir, Reyna said, if we move now, we might still have a chance to track them. Voss looked at her the way someone might look at a child who had just suggested something particularly stupid. This is not a movie, specialist. Captain Hayes knew the risks of patrol. We do not chase ghosts into Pakistan and start an international incident because one officer got himself captured. Secure the site, get our people back to base, and let the intelligence section handle it from here. He walked away before she could respond. Walsh caught her eye and shook his head slightly, a warning. Reyna bit down on what she wanted to say and focused on helping load the damaged equipment. The sun was dropping toward the mountains, and the temperature was falling with it. Chun would be in surgery within the hour. Davies and Kim would be fine. Hayes was gone. Before we move forward, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar acts of courage where you are from. Back at FOB Kushamand, Reyna went through the motions of post-mission protocol. Weapons cleaning, gear accountability, medical log entries. The aid station smelled like antiseptic and the recycled air that passed for ventilation in the plywood structures that made up most of the base. She worked alone, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. The other medics had already gone to chow. Reyna stayed, reorganizing supplies that did not need reorganizing, checking inventory that had been checked that morning. She did not want to go to the dining facility, where everyone would be talking about the ambush, speculating about Hayes, repeating whatever story was already forming about what had happened and what it meant. She opened her wall locker and pulled out the lock case from the bottom. Inside was the rifle that should not have been there, the custom Remington 700 her grandfather had built by hand, the one she had qualified expert with at distances most soldiers could not even see. The one she had carried through 3 months of designated marksman training before the medical reclass that had turned her from shooter into a saver, from someone who was supposed to take lives at long distance into someone who patched up the damage afterward. Her fingers traced the stock, worn smooth from her grandfather's hands and then hers. He had been a Marine Scout sniper in Vietnam, one of the quiet professionals who never talked about his service except to teach her the fundamentals. Breathe. Squeeze. Follow through. Shooting is not about killing, Mija. It is about protecting. You protect your brothers by taking away the threat before the threat takes them. He had died 2 years ago, 3 months before she enlisted. He never knew that the Army had trained her to do exactly what he had taught her, then decided she was needed elsewhere. Medics were in short supply. Female designated marksmen were a political complication. The needs of the Army came first. Reyna closed the case and locked it. She washed her face in the small sink and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. 23 years old. Brown skin tanned darker by 11 months in the Afghan sun. Dark hair pulled back tight in a regulation bun. Eyes that had seen things she would never talk about in letters home to her mother in El Paso. She looked tired. The door to the aid station opened and Corporal Mendoza stuck his head in. Ortiz, the LT wants everyone at the briefing in 5. She nodded and followed him to the operations center, a larger plywood building with maps on the walls and the permanent smell of bad coffee. The room was already crowded with platoon leaders, squad leaders, and senior NCOs. Voss stood at the front next to a map of the valley, his expression neutral. Listen up, Voss said. I just got off comms with battalion. Captain Hayes is confirmed captured by a Haqqani element. Likely moved across the border into Pakistan. State Department is being notified. We are to maintain defensive posture and continue operations as planned. There will be no rescue attempt. The room went silent. Walsh, the gunnery sergeant, spoke up. Sir, with respect, we have assets. We could put together a team. Boss cut him off. This is not a discussion, Gunny. The decision comes from higher. Captain Hayes knew the risks. We all do. Mounting a cross-border operation would require approvals we will not get and would risk additional casualties we cannot afford. The focus now is on securing this base and continuing the mission. Reyna felt something cold settle in her chest. She thought about Hayes, bleeding and captured, being moved deeper into hostile territory while everyone stood around talking about political approvals and risk assessments. She thought about the way Voss had looked at the ambush site, calculating costs instead of lives. Dismissed, Voss said. Platoon leaders, stay for operations brief. Reyna walked out with the others. In the darkness between buildings, she heard Walsh talking to another Marine, his voice low and angry. That is our company commander out there. We should be moving right now. Voss does not want to, someone else said. He has been waiting for Hayes to screw up since he got here. This is his chance to take command. The voices faded as Reyna walked back to the aid station. She sat on her bunk in the dark, not bothering with lights. Through the thin walls, she could hear the generators running, the distant sound of a helicopter, voices she could not quite make out. Somewhere in those mountains, Hayes was alive or dead or dying, and no one was going to do anything about it. Morning came too early, announced by the crackling loudspeaker system and reveille that nobody actually stood for anymore. Reyna had slept maybe 3 hours, her dreams full of explosions and the image of Hayes being dragged into the trees. She dressed in the dark and reported to sit call at 0600, ready to process the usual lineup of soldiers with minor complaints and legitimate injuries. The aid station filled quickly. Specialist Morrison with a twisted ankle from the obstacle course. Private Delgado with a rash from not changing his socks enough. Corporal Khan, who probably had pneumonia but refused to admit it. Reyna worked through them methodically, taking vitals, making assessments, referring the serious cases to the physician assistant who worked out of the main medical tent. Between patients, the conversation kept circling back to Hayes. Everyone had a theory. The Haqqani network wanted to ransom him. They would execute him on video. He was already dead. No one knew anything real, but that did not stop the speculation. Staff Sergeant Ramirez came in around 0800, ostensibly to get his blood pressure checked, but really to talk. Ramirez was one of the senior medics, a career soldier with 15 years in and opinions about everything. He sat on the exam table and rolled up his sleeve, watching Reyna wrap the cuff around his arm. Heard you were on that patrol yesterday, Ramirez said. Reyna pumped the bulb and watched the gauge. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Voss is telling everyone Hayes got careless, that he ignored intelligence about the route. The gauge read 130/85, higher than it should be. Reyna made a note on his chart. Did he? Ramirez snorted. Hayes is the most careful officer I have ever served under. Man checks and double-checks everything. This was not on him. Reyna said nothing. She had learned early that silence was safer than opinions, especially when those opinions involved officers and politics and the complicated hierarchy that governed who could say what about whom. You were at Benning, Ramirez said, watching her, before the medical reclass. Reyna met his eyes. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Heard you were good. Really good. She finished unhooking the blood pressure cuff and started packing it away. I was adequate. That is not what I heard. Ramirez leaned forward slightly. I heard you shot expert at 800 meters. I heard Sergeant Major Hollis said you had the best fundamentals he had seen in 10 years. I heard the only reason you were here playing medic instead of out there doing what you trained for is because they needed bodies in medical and you happened to be female at the wrong time. Reyna kept her expression neutral. The Army assigns people where they are needed, Staff Sergeant. Yeah. Ramirez stood up, rolling his sleeve back down. They do. Your blood pressure is elevated. You need to watch your sodium intake and try to manage your stress levels. He smiled slightly, a knowing expression that said they both understood the subtext. Thanks, document. You take care of yourself. After he left, Raina sat at the small desk and opened the medical database to update charts. She tried to focus on the work, but her mind kept drifting to what Ramirez had said. The medical reclass had come through 8 weeks into designated marksman training, presented as an opportunity. The Army needs skilled medical personnel. You have aptitude. This is a chance to save lives instead of taking them. She had been 21 and eager to serve however they needed her. It was only later she realized that female shooters made some people uncomfortable, that the optics were complicated, that it was easier to put her somewhere traditional. The door opened and Specialist Torres came in, another medic on the rotation. He dropped his aid bag on the counter and grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler. You hear about Hayes' file? Raina looked up. What about it? Torres sat down and opened his water. Captain Hayes kept this little black notebook, right? Operations notes, personal observations, that kind of thing. Sergeant Walsh found it in Hayes' quarters when they were securing his stuff. Apparently Hayes had written evaluations of everyone in the company. Not official ones, just his own assessments. And? Torres grinned. Apparently he wrote a whole page about you. Walsh mentioned it to Lieutenant Voss during the morning brief, and Voss about lost his mind. Wanted to know why Hayes was keeping unofficial evaluations and what business he had commenting on enlisted personnel assignments. What did it say? Raina asked quietly. Torres shrugged. Walsh did not share details. But the impression I got was Hayes thought you were being wasted in medical, that you had skills that should be utilized differently. The information settled into Raina's chest like a weight. Hayes had noticed. More than that, he had documented it, had gone on record in his private notes that she was capable of more than sick call and trauma response. She felt something shift inside her, a combination of gratitude and grief. Hayes had seen her, and now he was gone. Where's the notebook now? Raina asked. Torres finished his water. Boss took it, said it needed to be secured with Hayes' other personal effects. The tone suggested Voss was more interested in destroying anything that questioned his judgment than preserving Hayes' property. Raina went back to her charts, but the words blurred on the screen. She thought about Hayes, always professional, always fair, the kind of officer who remembered the names of every soldier in his company and asked about their families. He had requested her for yesterday's patrol specifically. Medical support rotates with patrol schedules, she had told Voss, but that was not entirely true. Hayes could have taken any medic. He had chosen her. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of routine. Raina treated a split lip from a fight in the barracks, administered vaccines for new arrivals, restocked supplies that had been depleted during yesterday's medevac. She worked on autopilot, her hands performing familiar tasks while her mind circled the same questions. Lunch came and went. She ate an MRE in the aid station, not bothering with the dining facility. Through the window, she could see soldiers moving between buildings, vehicles rolling out on patrol, the normal rhythm of base operations continuing as if nothing had changed, as if their company commander was not somewhere in enemy hands. Around 1400 hours, Corporal Davies showed up with the butterfly closures starting to peel away from the cut above his eye. Raina sat him down and examined the wound. It was healing clean, no signs of infection. She removed the old closures and applied fresh ones. How you holding up? She asked. Davies shrugged. Been better. Keep thinking about how fast it happened. 1 second we were driving. Next second, everything is exploding. The IEDs were placed perfectly, Raina said. Whoever planned that ambush knew exactly what they were doing. Davies nodded. Professional job. That is what scares me. These guys were not amateurs. They knew our route, our timing, everything. Makes you wonder who is feeding them information. The thought had occurred to Raina as well, but she had pushed it aside, not wanting to add paranoia to everything else. You think we have a leak? I do not know what to think, Davies said. I just know Captain Hayes did not get careless. And I know Lieutenant Voss seems real eager to blame him and move on. Raina finished with the closures and stepped back. You're good to go. Keep it clean and dry. Davies stood up, but did not leave immediately. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Hayes talked about you sometimes. To the squad leaders. Said you were one of the most capable soldiers he had ever worked with. Said the army made a mistake reassigning you to medical. What else did he say? Reyna asked. That if things ever went sideways, you were exactly the kind of person he would want watching his back. Davies headed for the door, then paused. Feels wrong, you know? Just leaving him out there. After he left, Reyna sat in the quiet aid station and felt the full weight of what she was beginning to understand. Hayes had valued her skills. He had advocated for her, documented his assessment that she was being underutilized. He had chosen her for yesterday's patrol, and now he was captured, and Voss had made it clear there would be no rescue attempt. She thought about her grandfather, about the lessons he had taught her on the range in Texas, the philosophy he had drilled into her alongside the marksmanship fundamentals. You protect your brothers by taking away the threat before the threat takes them. Shooting is not about killing, Mija. It is about protecting. The door opened again, and Lieutenant Voss walked in without knocking. Specialist Ortiz, I need your aid bag inventoried and ready for inspection tomorrow morning. Yes, sir, Reyna said, standing. Sir, has there been any update on Captain Hayes? Voss looked at her with barely concealed irritation. That is not your concern, Specialist. Your concern is maintaining medical readiness for this unit. Captain Hayes knew the risks of his position. We all do. The best thing you can do is focus on your duties and let command handle the larger strategic picture. With respect, sir, Captain Hayes is part of this unit. It seems like rescuing him should be part of that larger strategic picture. Voss's expression hardened. You are a medic specialist, not an operator, not a strategist. Certainly not anyone whose opinion on combat operations holds any weight whatsoever. Captain Hayes made decisions that led to his capture. Those decisions have consequences. End of discussion. He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Reyna stood in the empty aid station, hands clenched at her sides, and made a decision. If Voss was not going to do anything, if command was not going to authorize a rescue, then she would have to find another way. Hayes had believed in her capabilities. It was time to prove he had been right. The medical supply run to Village Callet was scheduled for 0900 the next morning. Reyna volunteered before anyone else could, citing the need to check on the local clinic and assess their medication needs. Staff Sergeant Ramirez approved it without question. Supply runs were routine, unglamorous work that most medics tried to avoid. Reyna made sure her aid bag was fully stocked and added extra trauma supplies, just in case. The convoy was small, just 2 vehicles and 6 soldiers. Corporal Mendoza drove the lead Humvee with Reyna in the passenger seat. The road to Callet wound through the valley, passing terraced fields and scattered compounds. It was the same route they took every 2 weeks, familiar enough that everyone had stopped being vigilant about it months ago. Reyna watched the landscape roll past and thought about angles. The village sat at the base of the mountains, maybe 15 kilometers from where Hayes had been taken. The Haqqani network operated in those mountains. Everyone knew that. They had safe houses, supply caches, routes that crossed into Pakistan where American forces could not follow. If Hayes was still alive, he would be somewhere in that network. The clinic in Callet was a single-room building with concrete walls and a corrugated metal roof. The local doctor, a thin man named Hamid who had trained in Kabul before the war, greeted Reyna with tired professionalism. They went through the inventory together, counting bandages and antibiotics, discussing which medications were running low. You seem distracted today, Hamid said in careful English. Reyna looked up from her clipboard, just thinking about supply chain issues. Hamid smiled slightly, the expression of someone who recognized a lie but was too polite to call out. I heard about the American captain, the one who was taken. News travels fast, Reyna said. Always. Hamid organized bottles of medication on a shelf. The men who took him, they are Haqqani. Very dangerous. They took him into the mountains, to a compound near the old shepherd trails. Reyna kept her voice neutral. You know this how? Hamid glanced toward the door, checking that they were alone. My cousin lives in the next valley. He saw them moving through 2 nights ago. 4 fighters and 1 prisoner, American uniform. They were heading toward Azizgar. Where's that? Reyna asked. Hamid moved to the window and pointed northeast. Maybe 12 kilometers from here. There's an old compound there, built during the Soviet War. The Haqqani use it sometimes as a staging point before crossing the border. Very remote, very defensible. Reyna processed this information, her mind already calculating distances and approach routes. Can you show me on a map? Hamid hesitated, fear flickering across his face. This is dangerous knowledge. If the wrong people knew I told you this, my family would pay. I understand, Reyna said quietly, and I would never reveal my source. But that captain is my commanding officer. If there is any chance he is still alive, I need to know where to look. Hamid studied her for a long moment, then pulled out a worn paper map from a drawer. He spread on the table and pointed to a spot in the mountains. Here, the compound is here, maybe 800 meters elevation above the valley floor. The trails are difficult, but not impossible. His finger traced a route. This is how the fighters would approach. But you cannot go there. It will be suicide. Reyna memorized the location, the surrounding terrain, the approaches Hamid had indicated. I'm not planning anything. I just need to provide accurate intelligence to my command. Hamid folded the map slowly. Your command already knows where the captain is. They choose not to act. The statement hit harder than it should have. Reyna finished the inventory in silence, loaded the requested supplies into the Humvee, and thanked Hamid for his assistance. On the drive back to base, she stared at the mountains and thought about Hayes in that compound, waiting for a rescue that was not coming. Back at FOB Kushimand, Reyna went straight to the operations center. Lieutenant Voss was in his office, reviewing patrol reports. She knocked on the doorframe and waited for acknowledgement. Was it, Specialist? Voss said without looking up. Sir, I have information about Captain Hayes' location. Now Voss looked up, his expression somewhere between irritated and incredulous. Information from where? Local sources during the medical supply run. There is a compound near Azizgar, approximately 12 kilometers northeast of Kalat. Intelligence suggests Captain Hayes was moved there 2 nights ago. Voss leaned back in his chair. Intelligence suggests. And your source for this intelligence would be who exactly? A doctor at the village clinic. His information comes from family in the area. So unverified intelligence from a local national whose reliability we cannot assess, about a location we cannot confirm, based on hearsay from unnamed relatives. Voss shook his head. This is exactly the kind of wishful thinking that gets people killed. Specialist. We do not launch operations based on village gossip. Sir, the source is credible. The location makes tactical sense. It is a known Haqqani staging area. And how would you know what makes tactical sense? Voss said, his voice taking on an edge. You are a medic. Your job is to treat injuries, not analyze enemy patterns or propose combat operations. I appreciate your concern for Captain Hayes, but you are not qualified to assess intelligence or recommend courses of action. Reyna fought to keep her voice level. Sir, I am simply passing along information that could be relevant to a rescue operation. There is no rescue operation, Voss said flatly. I have explained this already. Captain Hayes is likely across the border by now. Even if he is at this compound you have heard about, we do not have authorization to conduct cross-border operations. We do not have the intelligence infrastructure to confirm the location. We do not have the tactical advantage to assault a fortified position in hostile territory. This is not a discussion, Specialist. It is a reality. So we just leave him there, Reyna said. Voss stood up, his face flushing. You do not get to question command decisions, Specialist. You especially do not get to second-guess strategic assessments made by officers with actual combat experience and tactical training. I did not know what Captain Hayes told you or what ideas he put in your head about your capabilities, but you are a medic. That is all. Your opinion on rescue operations holds exactly 0 weight in this command structure. He moved around the desk toward her. Furthermore, if I hear that you are conducting unauthorized intelligence gathering or making promises to local nationals about American military actions, you will face disciplinary action. Are we clear? Yes, sir, Reyna said. Good. Dismissed. Reyna walked out of the operations center with her jaw clenched tight enough to hurt. She crossed the base to the aid station, not trusting herself to interact with anyone until the anger subsided. Inside, She sat at the desk and forced herself to breathe slowly, the way her grandfather had taught her before taking a long shot. Control your heart rate. Control your breathing. Control your mind. The door opened and Gunnery Sergeant Walsh stepped in. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it. Heard you had a chat with the lieutenant. Word travels fast, Reyna said. Walsh smiled grimly. Small base. I also heard you might have actionable intelligence on Hayes' location. Reyna looked at him carefully. The gunny was old-school Marine Corps, hard and competent, the kind of NCO who had seen enough combat to know the difference between following orders and doing what was right. Maybe. Why? Because Voss is not going to act on it. Walsh crossed his arms. He has been looking for an excuse to discredit Hayes since they both arrived here. This capture gives him everything he wanted. Hayes out of the picture, Voss in command, and a convenient narrative about an officer who got careless and paid the price. You think Voss would actually sabotage a rescue? Reyna asked. I think Voss is more interested in his career than his Marines. Walsh moved closer, lowering his voice. Look, I cannot do anything official. Chain of command is chain of command. But if someone had good intelligence and the capability to act on it, I would not necessarily stand in their way. I'm a medic, Reyna said, not an operator. Walsh looked at her with an expression that said he knew exactly what she had trained to be before the Army decided otherwise. Hayes kept notes on everyone in his company. I read what he wrote about you before Voss confiscated the notebook. Hayes thought you were the most naturally gifted marksman he had ever seen. Thought it was criminal that you were stuck running sick call instead of doing what you were trained for. What are you suggesting, Gunny? I am suggesting that sometimes the right thing and the authorized thing are not the same. Walsh straightened up. There is a supply convoy heading to Cala tomorrow at 0600. If someone needed to do reconnaissance of the surrounding area, that would provide cover. And if that someone happened to have a rifle that was not on any official equipment roster, well, what command does not know cannot hurt them. He left without waiting for a response. Reyna sat in the silence and thought about Hayes, about Voss's refusal to act, about Walsh's careful suggestion that she had options beyond official channels. She thought about her grandfather's philosophy. You protect your brothers by taking away the threat before the threat takes them. She opened her wall locker and looked at the rifle case. The Remington 700 her grandfather had built, the one she had qualified with at distances most soldiers could not even see. The one that represented everything she had trained to be before the Army decided she was needed elsewhere. Tomorrow morning, she would be on that supply convoy, and she would do more than just reconnaissance. She would find out exactly where Hayes was being held, and she would start planning how to get him out, with or without authorization, with or without support, because that was what you did for someone who had believed in you when no one else had. Reyna waited until 0200 when the base was at its quietest. The night shift guard were focused on the perimeter, their attention directed outward toward potential threats, not inward at a single medic moving between buildings. She carried her aid bag like she was responding to a medical call, the perfect cover for being out of her bunk. The armory was locked, but she was not going there. Her rifle was in her personal locker, never entered into the official weapons registry, brought to Afghanistan in her deployment baggage as a piece of home. Technically a violation of regulations. Practically the kind of thing that happened all the time and no one cared about unless it became a problem. She made her way to the communications building instead, a small plywood structure that housed the encrypted satellite uplink and the desk with a night watch officer process routine traffic. Sergeant First Class Chun was on duty exactly as Walsh had mentioned during their brief conversation after evening chow. Chun had been an instructor at Fort Benning, one of the cadre who had trained Reyna during her designated marksman course. He had told her then that she had a gift, that she saw angles and distances the way some people saw music. Chun looked up when she entered and nodded once. Wondered when you would show up. Coffee is fresh if you want some. Reyna poured a cup from the battered pot and sat down across from him. The communications room was warm, heated by equipment that ran constantly. Outside, the temperature had dropped into the 40s. You talked to Walsh. I did. Chun leaned back in his chair. He mentioned you might need some assistance with a personal project. That is one way to put it. Chun pulled out a folder from beneath a stack of routine reports. I took the liberty of pulling some imagery. Satellite passes over the Azizgar area from the past 72 hours. He spread several printed photos across the desk. Here is your compound. Looks like it was a Soviet-era outpost, reinforced walls, good fields of fire. I count maybe 12 structures inside the perimeter. Reyna studied the images, her mind automatically assessing approaches and dead zones. Any activity visible. Chun pointed to one photo. Heat signatures here and here, consistent with occupied buildings. I count maybe 15 to 20 individuals based on thermal imaging. Could be more inside structures that are better insulated. He tapped another image. This is interesting, though. Single heat signature in this building, separated from the others. Alone. Hayes, Reyna said quietly. Most likely. Chun pulled out a topographical map. The compound sits at about 800 meters elevation. Nearest approach from the valley floor is here, through this wadi. About a 3-hour climb in darkness, longer with gear. The real problem is this ridgeline to the west. Anyone positioned, there is clear line of sight to the entire compound. Which means it is also a perfect position for Overwatch, Reyna said. Chun looked at her steadily. You would need to be in position before dawn, which means leaving tonight, or at the latest tomorrow night. And you would need someone running comms, someone who could coordinate extraction if things go sideways. I cannot ask you to risk your career for this, Reyna said. You are not asking. Chun closed the folder. Hayes is a good officer. Better than most. The idea of leaving him out there while Voss plays political games makes me sick. Besides, I trained you. I know what you can do. If anyone can pull this off, it is you. Reyna felt something release in her chest, the weight of isolation easing slightly. What I need to know about the area. Chun spent the next 30 minutes walking her through the terrain, the approach routes, the likely guard patterns based on standard Haqqani network tactics. He explained the communication protocols, the frequencies she could use to reach him without going through official channels. He showed her where the nearest coalition forces were positioned, the closest quick reaction force that could provide support if she could get Hayes to a link-up point. Weather forecast is clear for the next 48 hours, Chun said. New moon tomorrow night, minimal ambient light. Temperature will drop to near freezing at elevation. Wind should be calm until about 0400 when the mountain thermals start. Reyna memorized the information, adding it to her mental calculations. What about timeline? Any intelligence on how long they will hold him there? Chun hesitated, then pulled out another piece of paper. This came through intelligence channels this morning. Intercepted communication, translated from Pashto. The Haqqani commander is demanding ransom from the Americans. If no response comes within 48 hours, Hayes will be executed and the video distributed as propaganda. 48 hours from when? Reyna asked. From 0600 this morning. Chun checked his watch. So you have about 44 hours left. The timeline compressed everything. Reyna had been thinking in terms of careful planning, thorough preparation, waiting for the perfect moment. Now the perfect moment was gone, and only necessity remained. I need to move tomorrow night. Agreed. Chun stood and walked to a locked cabinet, pulling out a handheld radio and a spare battery. This is off the books. Encrypted, short range, but enough to reach me from the mountains. I will be monitoring on this frequency. He wrote down a series of numbers. If you get into trouble, call it in and I will spin up whatever support I can. What about Voss? What Voss does not know cannot hurt him. Chun handed her the radio. Or you. Officially, I am lending you this radio for a medical supply run tomorrow. If you happen to use it for something else, that is between you and your conscience. Reyna took the radio and slipped it into her aid bag. Thank you, Sergeant. Thank me when you bring Hayes back. Chun returned to his desk. Now get out of here before someone notices you're not in your bunk. Reyna left the communications building and moved through the darkness back to her quarters. Inside, she laid out her gear methodically. The rifle first, checked and rechecked. Her grandfather had taught her that ritual, the careful inspection of every component before a mission. The action was smooth, the scope properly zeroed, the magazine loaded with match-grade ammunition she had carefully hoarded from her training days. Medical supplies next. She packed light, focusing on trauma care. Tourniquets, pressure bandages, hemostatic gauze, morphine. If she found Hayes alive and injured, she needed to be able to stabilize him for movement. Food and water for 3 days, minimal but sufficient. Cold weather gear, because the mountains at night would be brutal. She was checking her load weight when the door opened without warning. Reina's hand moved to cover the rifle, but it was too late. Lieutenant Voss stood in the doorway, his expression cold and triumphant. Specialist Ortiz. Interesting collection of equipment for someone who is supposed to be running sick call. Reina said nothing. There was nothing to say that would help. Voss stepped inside and closed the door. That is not a standard-issue rifle. In fact, that is not any kind of rifle that should be on this base without proper registration and armory storage. He moved closer, examining her gear. Looks like someone is planning an unauthorized operation. Sir, I can explain. Save it. Voss pulled out his phone and took several photos of the rifle and equipment. This is grounds for court-martial, specialist, possession of an unregistered weapon, planning an unauthorized mission, possibly desertion if you actually intended to leave the wire. His voice was almost cheerful. Captain Hayes had a lot of faith in you. Shame he will not be around to see how spectacularly you validated my assessment that you have no business in any operational capacity. You're not going to stop me, Reina said quietly. Voss laughed. I do not need to stop you. I just need to confiscate this weapon and place you under restriction to quarters pending disciplinary action, which I'm doing right now. He reached for the rifle. Reina stepped between Voss and the weapon. Sir, Captain Hayes will be executed in 44 hours if someone does not act. You refuse to authorize a rescue. I'm trying to do what you will not. What I will not do, Voss said, his voice rising, is throw away more lives on a hopeless mission to save one man who got himself captured through poor judgment. You want to play hero, specialist? You want to prove you are just as capable as the men? This is exactly the kind of emotional, irrational thinking that proves women do not belong in combat operations. You are confined to quarters. That rifle is being confiscated, and in the morning, you will face formal charges. He reached for the rifle again. Reina did not move. They stood facing each other in the small room, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Voss smiled. Or you can make this easy. Give me the rifle, accept the restriction, and maybe I will recommend non-judicial punishment instead of a full court-martial. You will lose rank, lose pay, but you will keep your career. Your choice. Reina thought about Hayes in that compound, running out of time. She thought about her grandfather's lessons about protecting those who could not protect themselves. She thought about every time someone had told her she was not capable, not qualified, not suited for the mission. She made her choice. Reina grabbed the rifle and chambered around in one smooth motion, not pointing it at Voss, but making it clear she was not surrendering anything. Sir, you can confiscate this weapon. You can place me under arrest. You can end my career. But you cannot stop me from knowing that I had the skills to save Captain Hayes and chose not to use them, because an officer cared more about regulations than lives. Voss's face went white with rage. You just threatened a superior officer. I did no such thing, sir. I stated a fact. Reina slung the rifle over her shoulder. Now you need to decide if you're going to physically stop me, which would require you to explain why you prevented a rescue attempt, or if you're going to let me walk out of here and deal with the consequences later. They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Voss stepped back. You walk out that door, your career is over. Then it is over, Reina said. She grabbed her pack and headed for the exit. Hayes believed in me. That matters more than rank. She left Voss standing in her quarters and walked into the night, toward the mountains and a rescue attempt that would either save a life or destroy her own. Reina spent the day in a state of forced normalcy, running sick call, and trying not to think about the confrontation with Voss or the mission that loomed ahead. She treated a sergeant with bronchitis, stitched up a private who had caught his hand on concertina wire, and dispensed ibuprofen to a steady stream of soldiers with various aches and complaints. Between patients, she monitored the radio traffic and listened to the preparations for the official rescue attempt. Voss had finally authorized a mission. Not because he wanted to save Hayes, Reina suspected, but because the pressure from higher command had become impossible to ignore. The operation brief came through at 1300 hours. A reinforced squad would move to the Azizgar area under cover of darkness, establish overwatch positions, and attempt to extract Hayes if the opportunity presented itself. It sounded professional. It sounded well-planned. It sounded exactly like the kind of half-hearted effort designed to fail, so Voss could tell his superiors he had tried everything possible. The rescue team rolled out at 2200 hours. Reyna watched from the aid station window as the vehicles passed through the gate, their lights dimmed, soldiers tense and ready. Gunnery Sergeant Walsh was leading the ground element. At least they had someone competent in charge, even if the mission itself was compromised from the start. She tried to sleep, but gave up after an hour of staring at the ceiling. Instead, she sat at the small desk and went through her own mission planning again, checking and rechecking routes and contingencies. The official rescue team would be operating in one area. She would approach from a different direction entirely, using the terrain to mask her movement. If they succeeded, her mission would be unnecessary. If they failed, she would be Hayes' last chance. The radio crackled to life at 0300. Reyna recognized Walsh's voice immediately, tight with controlled anger. Raptor 6, this is Viking 1. We're taking effective fire from multiple positions, 2 casualties, requesting permission to withdraw. The response came from Voss, safe in the operations center. Viking 1, what is your status on the primary objective? Negative contact, Walsh said. Intelligence was bad. The compound is empty. This is an ambush position. They knew we were coming. Reyna closed her eyes. Of course they had known. Voss had either intentionally provided bad intelligence or had been so careless in operational security that the Haqqani network had been alerted. Either way, the result was the same. The official rescue had failed before it even began. The firefight lasted another 20 minutes before Walsh managed to break contact and get his team back to the vehicles. 2 soldiers wounded, neither critically, but the mission was finished. Reyna listened to the after-action reports filtering through the radio and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Hayes was still out there. The clock was still ticking, and now there would be no second official attempt. At 0500, Sergeant Chen appeared at the aid station door. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. Inside, quickly, Reyna let him in and locked the door. Chun spread a fresh satellite image on the desk. This came through an hour ago. Thermal imaging shows the Haqqani move their prize. Hayes is no longer at Azizgar, where Reyna asked, fighting down panic. Chun pointed to a location farther into the mountains. Here, smaller compound, more remote, maybe 18 kilometers from the original location. The good news is it is less defended. I count maybe 6 heat signatures total. The bad news is it is harder to reach and closer to the Pakistan border. How much time do I have? 36 hours. Chen checked his watch. Maybe less. The intelligence intercept indicated they are moving up the execution timeline after tonight's failed rescue attempt. They know we're looking for him now. Reyna studied the new location, her mind racing through approach options. Can you get me close? There's a village called Sarpool about 8 kilometers from the compound. Medical convoy is scheduled to run there tomorrow at 0800, routine supply delivery. I can make sure you are on it. From there, you are on foot. 8 kilometers through hostile territory. Alone, with a ticking clock and no support except Chun on a radio that might not even reach that far into the mountains. Reyna felt the weight of it pressing down on her, the impossibility of what she was attempting. You do not have to do this, Chun said quietly. No one would blame you for walking away. This is not your responsibility. Reyna thought about Hayes being dragged from the burning Humvee, blood streaming down his face. She thought about his notebook, the page he had written about her capabilities, his belief that she was being wasted. She thought about her grandfather teaching her to shoot, the fundamental philosophy he had drilled into her alongside the marksmanship skills. Shooting is not about killing, Mija. It is about protecting. He believed in me when no one else did, Reyna said. That makes it my responsibility. She nodded slowly. Then need to get some rest. Real rest, not this half-awake planning you've been doing. The convoy leaves in 3 hours. You need to be sharp. After he left, Reyna lay down on her bunk and tried to force herself into sleep. Her mind would not cooperate, cycling through scenarios and contingencies, calculating angles and distances. She thought about the official rescue team, how they had walked into an ambush because someone had failed to provide good intelligence. She thought about Voss, safe in his office, already crafting the narrative about how he had done everything possible and Hayes had simply been unlucky. She must have dozed eventually because the next thing she knew, her alarm was buzzing and pale light was seeping through the window. 0700. 1 hour until the convoy left. Reyna moved through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, uniform, gear check. Everything had to look normal, routine, just another medical supply run to just another village. She packed her A-bag with the standard supplies, making sure the concealed radio was buried beneath bandages and medication. The rifle would have to wait until she was clear of the base. The convoy assembled at the motor pool. 2 Humvees, 6 soldiers, enough security for a routine mission, but nothing that would draw attention. Reyna climbed into the second vehicle and tried to project calm competence. Just another day. Just another mission. They rolled through the gate at 0815. The village of Sarpool was 40 minutes away, following a dirt road that wound through the valley. Reyna watched the mountains grow closer and thought about Hayes somewhere up there, waiting. 36 hours. Maybe less. The village was small, maybe 24 compounds clustered around a central square. The medical clinic was barely larger than a storage shed, run by an elderly man who greeted them with wary courtesy. Reyna went through the supply delivery mechanically, her attention divided between the task at hand and the mountains looming to the north. When the inventory was complete and the other soldiers were loading up to return to base, Reyna made her move. She stepped behind the clinic building, ostensibly to check the perimeter, and kept walking. Through a narrow alley, past a compound wall, into a grove of stunted trees where she had cached her rifle and packed the night before, smuggled out during a supposed equipment inventory. She slung the rifle across her back and started climbing. The terrain was rough, all loose rock and steep grades, but she had studied the route until she could walk it in her sleep. 8 kilometers to the compound, maybe 4 hours in daylight, longer once darkness fell. She needed to be in position before dawn, which meant moving through the night and finding a hide location while it was still dark. The first hour passed without incident. She climbed steadily, pacing herself, stopping every 20 minutes to glass the terrain ahead with her scope. No movement, no signs of activity, just rock and scrub brush and the occasional abandoned terraced field. The second hour was harder. The grade increased and the air thinned. Her pack felt heavier with each step, and her legs burned from the constant uphill push. She thought about the official rescue team, how they had been ambushed and driven back. She thought about the possibility that this entire effort was futile, that Hayes was already dead, or that she would reach the compound only to find it empty again. Doubt crept in like cold water, seeping through her resolve. She was one person, one medic with a rifle and barely any real operational experience outside of training. What made her think she could succeed where an entire squad had failed? What made her think her skills were enough? She stopped at a rocky outcrop and pulled out her water bottle, forcing herself to drink and rest. Her hands were shaking slightly, whether from exertion or fear, she could not tell. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from a valley, probably cooking fires from one of the scattered villages. The sky was beginning to turn orange with approaching sunset. The radio crackled in her pack. She pulled it out. Chen's voice came through, barely audible through the static. Lifeline 2, this is Night Watch, radio check. Night Watch, Lifeline 2, I read you weak but readable, Reyna said quietly. Copy. Be advised, intelligence indicates increased activity in your area of operation. Multiple foot patrols reported in the valleys. Recommend you find a position and go dark until 0400. Understood. We'll report when in position. Roger. And Lifeline? You're doing the right thing. Hayes will be proud. The transmission ended. Reyna sat on the rock and looked at the mountains ahead, At the impossible distance she still had to cover, at the compound somewhere beyond her line of sight, where Hayes was running out of time. She thought about her grandfather, about the promise she had made to use her skills to protect people. The doubt was still there, cold and persistent. But underneath, it was something stronger. A commitment she had made when she walked out of her quarters despite Voss's threats. She had chosen this, not because it was easy or because she was certain of success, but because it was right. Reyna stood up, adjusted her pack, and started climbing again. For more hours to the compound. 34 hours until the execution deadline. One chance to prove that Hayes's faith in her had not been misplaced. The sun dropped below the ridgeline, and darkness began to gather in the valleys. She climbed into it without hesitation, one step at a time, toward whatever waited in those mountains. The compound came into view just after midnight, a dark cluster of buildings silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky. Reyna had covered the last 2 kilometers on her stomach, crawling through scrub brush and loose rock, staying below the ridgeline. Now she lay in a shallow depression 800 meters from the target, her rifle beside her, watching the compound through her scope. 6 structures inside a low stone wall. 2 guards visible, walking a lazy patrol pattern that suggested they felt secure this deep in the mountains. Lights in 2 buildings, probably generators running. The rest dark and silent. Somewhere in there, Hayes was waiting, or his body was. Reyna pushed that thought away and focused on what she could control. She pulled out her rangefinder and started taking measurements. 817 meters to the main gate. 763 to the largest building. Wind coming from the southwest at maybe 8 kilometers per hour, variable. Temperature dropping fast as the night deepened. She logged each data point mentally, building the complete picture she would need when the moment came. Her grandfather had taught her this patience. Hours on the Texas range, lying in the dirt while he timed her, teaching her to become part of the landscape. The best snipers are not the best shots, Mija. They're the ones who can wait, who can watch, who can stay still while their body screams to move. She remembered the last time she had been in a position like this, 3 years ago at Fort Benning. The final exercise of designated marksman school, the test that would determine whether she passed or failed. They had given her a scenario, a hostage situation in an urban environment. Terrorists holding civilians in a building. Take the shot. Save the hostages. Reyna had found the perfect position, a rooftop 300 meters from the target building. She had identified the hostile through her scope, confirmed the shot was viable. Wind calm, clear line of sight, no obstacles. She had controlled her breathing, placed her finger on the trigger, begun the slow squeeze that would end one life to save others. Then she had seen the child, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, standing directly behind the terrorist in a position the exercise controllers had not mentioned in the briefing. At 300 meters with match-grade ammunition, the bullet would pass through the primary target and into whoever was behind. The shot that would save the hostages would also kill an innocent child. Reyna had released the trigger and keyed her radio. Negative on the shot. Civilian in the kill zone. The evaluator had responded immediately. Specialist Ortiz, you have a clear shot on the hostile. Take it. Sir, there's a child directly behind the target. Through and through is guaranteed at this range. The scenario does not include a child, Ortiz. You're seeing things that are not there. Take the shot. But there had been a child. Reyna could see her clearly, wearing a blue dress, holding a small stuffed animal. The exercise controllers had placed her there, probably to test whether the students would blindly follow orders or think independently. Reyna had refused to take the shot. She had failed the exercise. The evaluators had documented her refusal to engage a confirmed hostile when ordered. Within 2 weeks, she had been reclassified from designated marksman to combat medic specialist. The official reason was that the Army needed medical personnel. The unofficial reason, the one she heard whispered in corridors and read between the lines of her transfer orders, was that female soldiers who questioned orders were liabilities. Later, she had learned the truth. There had been no child in the exercise. The evaluators swore to it. But Reyna knew what she had seen. Whether it had been a trick of light, a shadow, or something her mind had invented to stop her from taking a shot she instinctively knew was wrong. The result was the same. She had chosen not to kill when ordered. Some people called it weakness. Sergeant Major Hollis had called it something else. He had found her after the washout, after the reclassification orders had come through. She had been packing her gear, trying not to cry from frustration and anger. "You have the best fundamentals I have seen in a decade," Hollis had said. "Better instincts than shooters with twice your experience. But you also have something more important. You have judgment. You know when not to pull the trigger. That is going to save more lives than you can imagine." She had not believed him then. Now, lying on a mountainside in Afghanistan with a rifle and a mission that defied every regulation she had sworn to uphold, she understood. The skills were important. The training mattered. But knowing when and why to use those skills was what separated shooters from protectors. Reyna settled deeper into her position and continued her surveillance. The guard pattern was predictable, changing every 30 minutes when the two sentries switched positions. The compound had no external lights except the illumination spilling from the occupied buildings. Poor operational security, probably born from the confidence that came with being this deep in hostile territory. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "Night Watch, Lifeline 2. I am in position." Chin's response came through after a moment of static. "Copy, Lifeline 2. What is your assessment?" 6 structures, 2 occupied, 2 guards on patrol. No sign of enhanced security. I have clear sight lines to all positions. Understood. Be advised, latest intelligence puts your timeline at 28 hours. They are definitely moving up the execution. 28 hours. Reyna checked her watch. 0100 now. Which meant Hayes would die tomorrow night at 0500 unless she acted. The timeline was collapsing faster than she had anticipated. "Can you confirm which structure is holding the prisoner?" Reyna asked. "Negative. Thermal imaging shows single heat signature in the northwest building, but cannot confirm identity. You're going to have to get closer." "Roger. We'll continue observation and report." "Lifeline," Chen said, his voice carrying an edge of concern she had not heard before. "You do not have to do this alone. I can request support. Quietly. People who owe Hayes. We could have a team out there by tomorrow night." Reyna thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. By tomorrow night, Hayes would already be dead, and any official or semi-official team would have to navigate the same command structure that had already failed once. This was her mission now, her choice, her responsibility. "Negative, Night Watch. I'm already committed. Just keep the line open in case I need extraction support." The radio went silent. Reyna returned to her observation, methodically logging every detail. The guards changed position. One of them smoked a cigarette, the orange glow visible even at this distance. Lights went out in one building, stayed on in the other. Someone emerged from the main structure and urinated against the wall before going back inside. Casual, relaxed, confident. They did not know she was here. That was the advantage. The only advantage she had. At 0300, the temperature dropped below freezing. Reyna could see her breath in the starlight. She pulled her cold weather gear tighter and forced herself to stay still despite the shivers that wanted to rack her body. Cold was temporary. Movement was permanent. Any shift in position could give away her location. She thought about Hayes in that compound, probably in the northwest building if Chin's intelligence was accurate. Was he cold? Was he injured? Was he even still conscious? The not knowing was almost worse than the danger. But speculation accomplished nothing. She needed to focus on what she could control. The plan formed slowly in her mind as she watched. Dawn would come around 0600. She needed to be in her final position before first light, which meant moving within the next hour. The ridgeline to the west was the obvious choice, the same position she had identified from the satellite imagery. It would give her clear sight lines to the entire compound and multiple firing angles. Once in position, she would wait until nightfall tomorrow. Let the routine settle. Let the guards grow comfortable. Then, when the moment was right, she would begin. Not a full assault, nothing so dramatic. Just precision, just patience, just removing threats one by one until Hayes had a chance to escape. It was not a perfect plan. It was barely a plan at all. But it was what she had. One medic, one rifle, one chance to save a man who had believed in her when no one else had. Reyna checked her gear one final time. Ammunition, water, medical supplies, radio, everything she would need for the next 24 hours. She took a long drink, knowing it might be her last chance for hours, and secured the bottle. At 0400, she began to move, not toward the compound, but parallel to it, working her way around to the western ridgeline. Slow, careful, silent. The mountain thermals were starting, just as Chun had predicted, the wind shifting as the temperature differential between valley and peaks created air movement. It would affect her shots tomorrow, but right now it provided cover, masking any small sound or movement might create. It took 90 minutes to reach the ridgeline. By the time she settled into her final position, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. Reyna dug into the rocky soil, creating a shallow hide that would break up her silhouette. She arranged loose rocks around her position for additional concealment and settled in with her rifle. From here, she had an unobstructed view of the entire compound, 760 meters to the main building. Good range, well within her capability. She could see the guards clearly now, their faces visible through the scope. Young men, maybe her age, probably convinced they were fighting a holy war. They had no idea death was watching them from the ridgeline. The sun rose slowly, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful in a harsh way. Reyna watched the compound come to life. More people emerged from the buildings, maybe 10 total now, instead of the 6 Chun had counted. Still manageable. Still possible. At 0700, they brought Hayes out. Even at this distance, Reyna could see he was alive. They walked him from the northwest building to the central courtyard, his hands bound behind his back, his face bruised and swollen, but recognizable. He was limping, but moving under his own power. Alive. Injured, but alive. Reyna felt something fierce and protective surge through her chest. She had made the right choice. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences she faced, this moment confirmed it. Hayes was alive, and she was going to bring him home. The day passed in increments measured by the movement of shadows and the rotation of guards. Reyna remained motionless in her hide position, her body cramped and stiff, her mind cataloging every detail of the compound below. This was the part of sniping that no one understood unless they had done it. Not the shooting, the waiting, the absolute stillness required to become invisible. She counted 12 fighters total. 8 regulars who moved between buildings on various tasks. 2 dedicated guards who maintained a perimeter patrol. 1 older man who appeared to be in charge, his movements confident and authoritative. And 1 younger fighter who seemed to have been assigned specifically to watch Hayes. They brought the captain out 3 more times during the morning. Each time, Reyna studied him through her scope, assessing his condition with both tactical and medical eyes. Bruising across his face and ribs, consistent with beatings. Favoring his left leg, possible fracture or severe contusion. Hands bound with rope that had rubbed his wrists raw. But his eyes were alert. He was tracking his surroundings, watching the guards, looking for opportunities. Still thinking. Still fighting. Around noon, they gave him water. Hayes drank carefully, conserving it, a sign of training and discipline. The young guard said something that made the others laugh. Hayes did not react, keeping his expression neutral. Smart. Do not give them the satisfaction. Do not show weakness. Reyna shifted her weight fractionally, trying to ease the pressure on her hip without creating movement visible from below. A sharp rock had been digging into her side for the past 2 hours. She ignored it, the way she had been trained to ignore discomfort. Pain was temporary. Compromise was permanent. At 1300 hours, a vehicle arrived. A battered Toyota pickup truck that looked like it had survived 3 decades of Afghan roads. 2 more fighters climbed out, along with a man in cleaner clothes who carried himself differently. Reyna adjusted her scope and studied his face. Older, maybe 50, with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of authority that went beyond the local commander. This was someone important. The important man spoke with the local commander for several minutes, their conversation animated but not heated. Then they walked to where Hayes was being held and brought him out again. The important man circled Hayes slowly, examining him like a piece of property being evaluated for purchase. Hayes stood straight despite the injuries, refusing to cower. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then the important man nodded and returned to his vehicle. Before driving away, he spoke to the local commander one more time. Reyna could not hear the words, but she understood the gesture that accompanied them. The important man drew his finger across his throat. Universal language. Time was up. The vehicle departed, leaving a cloud of dust that took minutes to settle. The local commander gathered his fighters and spoke to them. Reyna watched through her scope, reading body language and gestures. The decision had been made. Tomorrow morning, 0500. Execution. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely audible. Night Watch, Lifeline 2. Go ahead, Chen responded. Timeline just changed. I observed what appeared to be a senior Haqqani leader. After his departure, the local commander briefed his men. My assessment is execution moved to dawn tomorrow. That is 18 hours from now, Chen said quietly. Confirmed. I need to move tonight. Understood. What do you need from me? Just keep the line open. If this goes wrong, I'm going to need extract coordinates for whatever quick reaction force you can spin up. Already have them plotted. There is a clearing approximately 4 kilometers southeast of your position. I can have birds in the air within 30 minutes of your call. Roger. Reyna paused, then added, if I do not make contact by 0600 tomorrow, assume mission failure. Lifeline, Chen said, his voice carrying something that might have been emotion. Do not make me write that report. I will do my best, Night Watch. Lifeline 2 out. The afternoon stretched endlessly. The sun tracked across the sky, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the compound walls. Reyna's position remained in shade, which helped with concealment, but did nothing for the cold that seeped up from the frozen ground. Her legs had gone numb an hour ago. She flexed her toes inside her boots, maintaining circulation, fighting the urge to move. Around 1500 hours, she felt something warm on her hip. Blood. The sharp rock had finally worked through her clothing and opened a cut. Not serious, but it needed attention before it became a problem. Reyna waited until the patrol guards were on the far side of the compound, then carefully reached into her medical kit without shifting position. Gauze pad. Pressure. Quick application of field dressing. All accomplished with minimal movement, her medic training making the task almost automatic. The irony was not lost on her. She had been reclassified as a medic because the Army decided that was where she belonged. Now that same medical knowledge was keeping her functional for a mission that required the sniper skills they had told her to forget. Sometimes life had a sense of humor about these things. At 1600 hours, they brought Hayes out again. This time the treatment was rougher. One of the guards shoved him, making him stumble. Another struck him across the back with a rifle, but Hayes went down but pushed himself back up immediately. Reyna felt her finger drift toward the trigger, the protective instinct almost overriding tactical discipline. Not yet. Not while he was surrounded. Wait for the right moment. They left Hayes in the courtyard for 20 minutes, exposed to the afternoon's sun and wind, before dragging him back to the northwest building. Through her scope, Reyna saw him look up at the mountains, a brief moment of scanning the ridgelines. Was he looking for rescue? Did he know someone was out here? Or was he just taking measure of the terrain, planning his own escape if the opportunity came? She wanted to signal him somehow, let him know he was not alone. But any movement, any reflection, could give away her position. Hayes was a smart officer. If rescue came, he would adapt. That would have to be enough. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Reyna checked her watch. 1700 hours. 4 hours until full darkness. The plan crystallized in her mind with increasing clarity. Wait for night. Let the routine settle. The guard would assume their normal patrol pattern. Hayes would be locked in the northwest building, probably alone with minimal security since they were planning to execute him at dawn anyway. She would start with the guards. 2 precise shots to eliminate the perimeter security. Then the fighters in the main building, probably 3 or 4 based on the movement patterns she had observed. That would leave maybe 6 hostiles, chaos, and confusion, and Hayes with an opportunity to break out if he understood what was happening. Not a perfect plan. Plenty of ways it could fail. But 18 hours was not enough time for perfect. It was barely enough time for possible. At 1800 hours, the temperature dropped sharply as the sun disappeared behind the peaks. Reyna felt the cold seep deeper into her bones. She had been motionless for nearly 14 hours. Every muscle screamed. Her bladder was past full. Her mouth was dry despite the water she had sipped throughout the day. None of it mattered. This was the mission. This was what she had trained for, prepared for, chosen. She thought about her grandfather, about the long hours they had spent on the range in Texas. He had made her hold shooting positions until her arms shook, until tears streamed down her face from the strain, until she thought she could not possibly maintain it for another second. Then he had made her hold it longer. Why? She had asked him once, frustrated and hurting. Because when it matters, Mija, when someone's life depends on you making that shot, your body will fail you if you have not taught it to obey. Comfort is the enemy of excellence. Pain is just information. You decide what to do with it. She had decided. She would hold this position until darkness came. She would make the shots that needed to be made. She would give Hayes his chance. And if her body failed, if the cold and the exhaustion and the strain proved too much, then at least she would fail trying. The last light faded from the sky at 1900 hours. Reyna gave it another 30 minutes, letting full darkness settle, letting the fighters complete their evening routine. Lights came on in 3 buildings now, generators humming in the cold air. The patrol guards switched out, fresh sentries taking position. Everything predictable. Everything routine. At 1930, Reyna began her final preparations. She checked her rifle for the 100th time. Action smooth. Magazine seated. Scope clear. She verified her range calculations, adjusted for the temperature drop and the minimal wind. 760 meters to the main building. 740 to the northwest structure where Hayes was held. 817 to the main gate. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate, entering the mental state her grandfather had called the quiet place, where fear could not reach, where doubt had no voice, where only the mission existed. The compound below continued its evening rhythm, guards walking their pattern, fighters moving between buildings, none of them aware that death was watching from the ridgeline, that their routine was about to be shattered by a medic who had been told she did not belong in combat operations. Reyna settled deeper into her position, felt the rifle become an extension of her body, and waited for the moment. It would come soon. The guards would separate, creating the window she needed. And when it came, she would take it. For Hayes, for the faith he had shown in her, for every person who had ever doubted that she belonged here. The night air was perfectly still now. The temperature had dropped to near freezing. Her breath came in small, controlled puffs that dissipated quickly in the darkness. Below, one of the guards stopped to light a cigarette, the flame bright against the night. Almost time. Reyna chambered around slowly, the mechanical sound swallowed by the wind and distance. She settled her cheek against the stock, found the first target through her scope, and began the final countdown to a rescue that would either save a life or end her career. Either way, there was no turning back now. 2000 hours. The compound had settled into its night routine. 2 guards on patrol, circling the perimeter in opposite directions, meeting at the main gate every 8 minutes. 3 fighters visible in the central building, their silhouettes moving past the windows. The rest had dispersed to their quarters or were inside structures without external illumination. Hayes remained in the northwest building, alone as far as Reyna could determine through thermal patterns and movement. She had been in position for 16 hours. Her body had moved past pain into a state of numb acceptance. This was the reality now. Cold, stillness, focus. Everything else was background noise that could be ignored. Reyna performed her final equipment check with the precision of ritual. Magazine capacity, 10 rounds of match-grade .308 ammunition. She had 4 more magazines in her vest, but if she needed more than 10 rounds for this operation, she had already failed. The scope was zeroed for 750 meters, close enough to her primary shooting distances. She verified the turret settings one more time, muscle memory and training making the checks automatic. Wind had picked up slightly, coming from the west at approximately 10 kilometers per hour. Not enough to significantly affect bullet trajectory at this range, but enough to require minor adjustment. Reyna ran the calculations in her head. At 760 meters with a 10-kilometer crosswind, drift would be approximately 8 centimeters at target. Negligible for center mass shots, but critical for precision work. Temperature was -2 Celsius and dropping. Cold air meant denser atmosphere, which meant slightly less bullet drop than the warm daytime conditions she had zeroed for. She adjusted her elevation mentally, knowing she would need to aim fractionally lower than her scope indicated. The guard rotation happened on schedule. The two sentries met at the gate, exchanged brief words, then continued their opposite circuits. Reyna tracked the western guard through her scope, watching his pattern. 8 minutes per circuit, 45 seconds at each corner of the compound. Nobody question. Perfect routine, which made him perfectly predictable. She keyed her radio one final time. Night Watch, Lifeline 2, commencing operation in 30 minutes. Chen's voice came through immediately, tense but controlled. Copy Lifeline 2. QRF is on standby. Extract coordinates are loaded. I have your back. Roger. Reyna paused, then added something she had not planned to say. If this goes wrong, tell my mother I was doing what Grandpa taught me. Protecting people. The radio was silent for several seconds. Then Chen responded, his voice thick. You tell her yourself when you get back. Night Watch out. Reyna settled into her final shooting position, making micro-adjustments to her body placement. Left elbow positioned to support the rifle's weight without muscle tension. Right hand relaxed on the grip, finger resting along the trigger guard. Breathing deep and controlled, oxygenating her blood for the work ahead. This was the state her grandfather had called being in the weapon, where the rifle was not a tool, but an extension of will and purpose. She ran through the sequence one more time in her mind. First shot, western guard when he reaches the northwest corner, farthest from the main building. Second shot, eastern guard before he can react or take cover. That would eliminate perimeter security and create approximately 8 minutes before the next rotation discovered the bodies. Third through fifth shots, fighters in the main building. Visible through windows, probably relaxed and unprepared for contact. Remove them quickly before they can organize a response. Sixth shot, the young guard assigned to Hayes, if he emerged from the northwest building. 7th through 10th. Targets of opportunity based on how the situation developed. The plan required speed and precision in equal measure. Too slow and the element of surprise would be lost. Too fast and she would miss, alerting everyone to her position before achieving tactical advantage. The balance point was narrow. She had to find it and execute perfectly. At 2015 hours, something unexpected happened. A vehicle approached from the valley, headlights cutting through the darkness. The compound gates opened and a motorcycle rolled in, carrying 2 riders. They dismounted and the local commander came out to greet them. Even from this distance, Reyna could see the deference in his body language. She adjusted her scope and focused on the new arrivals. The passenger was the same important man who had visited earlier, the one who had ordered the execution timeline moved up. He had returned, probably to personally oversee Hayes' death. The second man was younger, but carried himself with similar authority, possibly the important man's son or lieutenant. This complicated everything. More targets meant more shots required. More shots meant more time exposed. More time meant greater chance of failure. But there was no choice now. The timeline was set. Dawn would come regardless of how many enemies were in the compound. The important man and the local commander walked toward the northwest building. Reyna's heart rate increased slightly. Were they moving Hayes? Executing him early? She forced herself to breathe slowly, controlling the adrenaline spike. Through her scope, she watched them enter the building. Voices carried faintly across the distance, angry and sharp. Then Hayes was dragged outside. Even at 760 meters, Reyna could see the fresh blood on his face. They had beaten him again. The important man was speaking, gesturing dramatically, probably delivering some speech about American imperialism or holy war or whatever justification he needed for murder. Hayes stood straight despite the injuries, refusing to show fear. The young guard raised his rifle, pointing it at Hayes's head. This was it. They were going to execute him now, tonight. Forget about waiting for dawn. Reyna's finger moved to the trigger, calculating the shot. 740 meters. Minimal wind. Cold air. If she took the shot now, she could save Hayes from immediate execution, but would lose all tactical advantage. Every fighter in the compound would know her position. The rescue would become a siege. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the hardest shot is the one you do not take. Patience is not waiting for the perfect moment. It is recognizing when the imperfect moment is good enough. Reyna held her position, finger on the trigger, but not yet applying pressure. Wait. Watch. The important man said something, and the young guard lowered his rifle. Hayes was still alive. They were not executing him yet. Just intimidation. Just theater. They dragged Hayes back into the northwest building. The important man and local commander returned to the central structure. The compound settled back into routine. Reyna released the breath she had been holding and recalculated her approach. 14 hostiles now instead of 12. The math was getting worse. At 20:45 hours, lights went out in 2 of the buildings. The fighters were settling in for the night. Only the central building and the guard positions remained illuminated. Perfect. Sleeping enemies were easier to manage than alert ones. Reyna, check her watch. 0500 was 8 hours away. She could wait until 0300 when human circadian rhythms would be at their lowest, when reactions would be slowest, when the guards would be fighting drowsiness and cold. That would give her maximum advantage. But 8 hours was a long time to maintain this level of readiness. And every minute increased the chance of some unpredictable event disrupting her opportunity. A guard rotation change. A random check on Hayes. Any number of variables that could destroy her carefully calculated plan. No, it had to be now, while the routine was predictable, while the guards were fresh enough to be confident but not yet alert to danger, while she still had the element of complete surprise. 2100 hours. Time to begin. Reyna settled her breathing into the pattern her grandfather had drilled into her thousands of times. For count, inhale. Hold for 2. 6 count, exhale. Hold for 2. Repeat. The rhythm slowed her heart rate, steadied her hands, cleared her mind of everything except the task ahead. She found the western guard in her scope. He was at the southwest corner now, starting his circuit toward the northwest. She tracked him smoothly, the crosshairs following his movement. 790 meters, walking at approximately 1 meter per second. Wind from the west, minimal drift. Temperature stable. The guard reached the northwest corner and stopped, exactly as he had done every 8 minutes for the past 16 hours. 45 seconds. He would stand there for 45 seconds before continuing his patrol. This was the window. Reyna placed the crosshair's center mass on his chest, adjusted fractionally for wind and cold air density. Her finger found the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure. The guard lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. Young, maybe 25. Someone's son, someone's brother, a man who had made choices that led him to this moment on this mountainside on this night. She exhaled slowly and began the final trigger squeeze. The rifle would fire between heartbeats, in the tiny moment of stillness when her body was perfectly calm. This was what her grandfather had taught her. This was what the army had trained her to do. This was what Hayes needed her to be. The crosshairs steadied on target. The trigger broke clean. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she saw the guard drop instantly, the cigarette falling from his hand in a small arc of orange light. No sound from the suppressed rifle. No flash visible at this distance. Just a man standing one moment and falling the next. Reyna was already transitioning to the second target before the first body hit the ground. The Eastern Guard, currently at the northeast corner. 800 meters. She found him in the scope, adjusted her aim point, controlled her breathing. The guard had not reacted yet, had not heard his partner fall, was still following his routine pattern. The second shot broke clean. The Eastern Guard collapsed against the compound wall and slid down, leaving a dark smear visible even in the low light. 2 down. Perimeter security eliminated. 8 minutes until the next rotation would discover the bodies. Reyna shifted her aim to the central building where 3 silhouettes moved past the windows. The rescue had begun. There was no turning back now. Only forward, through whatever came next, toward Hayes and extraction and consequences she would face later. If there was a later, she found a third target and began her breathing sequence again. The night was perfectly still. The compound below had no idea death had already arrived, and Captain Hayes was about to learn that the medic he had believed in had not forgotten her other skills. The third shot took a fighter visible through the central building's window. He had been standing near a lantern, completely silhouetted, an easy target. Reyna watched him drop and immediately shifted to the fourth target, another silhouette moving past the same window. The rhythm was building now, the sequence flowing like music her body had memorized. Fourth shot. Fifth shot. 2 more fighters down in the central building. That left one visible through the windows. Reyna found him in her scope just as he noticed his companions had fallen. She saw his mouth open, probably shouting an alarm, but the 6th shot ended that before any sound could carry. 6 down. 8 remaining hostiles based on her count. The compound erupted into chaos. Fighters poured from the darkened buildings, most without weapons, trying to understand what was happening. Reyna tracked them methodically, prioritizing threats. A man carrying an AK-47 became the 7th target. Another armed fighter, the 8th. They were moving erratically now, panic overriding training, making themselves easier targets than if they had taken cover and organized a defense. The 9th shot dropped a fighter running toward the northwest building where Hayes was held. The 10th took down the young guard who emerged from that same building, looking for the source of the attack. Reyna's magazine was empty. She performed a tactical reload without taking her eye from the scope, muscle memory making the movement automatic. Fresh magazine seated. Chamber around. Back on target in under 3 seconds. Someone in the compound had finally identified her general direction. Muzzle flashes erupted from near the main gate. Automatic weapons fire spraying toward the ridgeline. Most of the rounds impacted 50 meters below her position, but a few came close enough that she heard them snap overhead. They knew she was west of the compound, but had not pinpointed her exact location yet. Reyna shifted position slightly, moving 3 meters to her left, and resumed firing. The 11th shot silenced the fighter who had been shooting at her. The 12th took down another man who was trying to organize the remaining defenders. 3 hostiles left by her count, plus the important man and the local commander who had both disappeared into the northwest building. Then she heard it. Gunfire from inside the northwest building. Not outgoing fire at her, but close quarters shooting. Hayes. The captain had somehow gotten a weapon and was fighting back from inside. Reyna felt a surge of fierce pride. Of course he was. Hayes had been a Force Recon Marine before transferring to the Army. Even bound and beaten, he was still a warrior. Movement at the northwest building's door. A fighter staggered out, clutching his side, and collapsed in the courtyard. Hayes appeared in the doorway, hands still bound but now holding a pistol awkwardly, scanning for threats. Reyna could see blood streaming down his face from a fresh wound, but he was moving, fighting, surviving. The local commander emerged behind Hayes and raised his rifle. Reyna's 13th shot caught him in the chest before he could fire. The commander dropped, and Hayes spun, using his bound hands to aim the pistol behind him, but the threat was already neutralized. Then the important man appeared, not with a rifle, but with Hayes's own sidearm pressed against the captain's temple. Through her scope, Reyna could see him shouting, probably demanding Hayes drop his weapon. Hayes hesitated, clearly weighing his options, trapped between the gun at his head and the chaos around him. The important man started backing toward the motorcycle, dragging Hayes with him. Smart. Use the hostage as a shield, get to mobile transportation, escape into the mountains. If he made it to that motorcycle, everything Reyna had done would be wasted. Hayes would disappear into Pakistan, and this time there would be no rescue. Reyna calculated the shot. 740 meters. The important man mostly concealed behind Hayes. Only partial target visible, maybe 30 centimeters of shoulder and head exposed. Moving target, erratic movement as he dragged a resisting prisoner. Wind still minimal but present. This was not a shot she would normally take. Too much risk of hitting Hayes. Too many variables. Too low probability of success. But it was the only shot she had. She adjusted her aim point, leading the target's movement, accounting for the fact that Hayes was struggling and creating unpredictable motion. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. When the shot seems impossible, that is when you have to trust your training completely. Your eyes see what your mind cannot calculate. Let the weapon do the work. Reyna exhaled completely, let the crosshairs settle on the target, and squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. The rifle fired. Through the scope, she saw the important man's head snap back. He dropped instantly, releasing Hayes, who stumbled forward and fell to his knees. Hayes stayed down for maybe 2 seconds, then pushed himself up and looked toward the ridgeline. Reyna could not see his expression at this distance, but she saw him raise his bound hands in what might have been acknowledgement or salute, or just recognition that someone out there is helping him. 2 remaining hostiles broke from cover near the main building, probably trying to reach vehicles for escape. Reyna's 14th and 15th shots dropped them both. Then silence. No more movement in the compound, except Hayes, standing alone in the courtyard, surrounded by bodies, still holding the pistol in his bound hands. Reyna keyed her radio. Night watch, Lifeline 2, objective secured. 1 friendly needs immediate extraction. Chen's voice came back fast and urgent. Copy. QRF is launching now. ETA to your position 30 minutes. Can a package move? Reyna watched Hayes through her scope. He was checking the bodies, making sure threats were neutralized, moving with the methodical caution of someone who had survived too many combat situations to assume anything was over. Affirmative, package is mobile. He is armed and aware. I'm going to guide him to extract point. Roger, bring him home. Reyna shifted her radio to the emergency frequency that Hayes would be monitoring if he was thinking tactically. Captain Hayes, this is Specialist Ortiz. I am on the ridgeline west of your position providing overwatch. You need to move southeast toward the valley. 4 kilometers to extract point, QRF inbound in 30 minutes. There was silence. Then Hayes's voice came through, rough and strained but unmistakably alive. Ortiz? The medic? Yes, sir. Also formerly designated marksman before the Army decided otherwise. Time to move, Captain. There might be reinforcements coming. She watched Hayes process this information for maybe 3 seconds. Then he moved, heading southeast at a steady jog despite his injuries, the pistol held ready. Professional. Controlled. Exactly what she would expect from him. Reyna began packing her gear. The mission was not over until Hayes was on that helicopter, but the hardest part was done. She had eliminated 15 hostiles, saved Hayes from execution, and started the extraction sequence. Now came the tactical withdrawal, the movement through hostile territory in darkness, the race to reach the pickup zone before enemy reinforcements could organize pursuit. She slung her rifle and prepared to move, but something made her pause. She looked back at the compound one more time through her scope. 15 bodies. 15 men who had woken up this morning with no idea this would be their last day. She felt no satisfaction in that, only the cold certainty that it had been necessary. They had chosen to capture and torture and plan murder. She had chosen to stop them. Those are the only choices that mattered. Reyna left her hide position and started down the mountain, moving parallel to Hayes' route, but staying higher on the slope to maintain overwatch. Through occasional glimpses, she could see him making good progress, choosing his route well despite the darkness and his injuries. 3 kilometers to the extract point. 25 minutes until the helicopters arrived. At the 2-kilometer mark, Hayes' voice came through the radio again. Ortiz, I have headlights approaching from the north. Multiple vehicles. Reyna dropped prone and glassed the valley with her scope. 4 trucks, moving fast on the rough road, headlights bouncing. Reinforcements from a neighboring Haqqani cell, probably alerted by someone who escaped or by the sound of gunfire carrying across the mountains. They would reach the compound in minutes, discover the carnage, and begin pursuit. Captain, increase pace to extract point. I will delay pursuit. Negative, specialist. You have done enough. Break contact and withdraw to safety. With respect, sir, you are injured and on foot. They have vehicles and local knowledge. You will not make it without someone slowing them down. Keep moving. That is an order I am choosing to follow. She heard what might have been a laugh or a cough. Copy. Do not get yourself killed saving me, Ortiz. That would defeat the purpose. No promises, sir. Reyna found a position overlooking the road the vehicles would have to take. 700 meters. Good angle. She had 4 rounds left in her current magazine, plus 3 full magazines in reserve. 24 rounds total. For vehicles meant probably 16 to 20 fighters. The math was not good, but math rarely was in situations like this. The lead vehicle came into view. Reyna aimed for the engine block and fired. The truck lurched and died, blocking the narrow road. The 3 trailing vehicles had to stop, fighters pouring out, shouting and confused. She dropped 2 of them with quick shots, then shifted position as return fire began impacting around her previous location. Keep them pinned. Keep them focused on her instead of pursuing Hayes. That was the mission now. Reyna moved between firing positions, taking shots when targets presented themselves, displacing before they could zero in on her location. It was not sustainable. Eventually they would flank her, or she would run out of ammunition or make a mistake. But it did not need to be sustainable. It just needed to buy Hayes enough time. Her radio crackled. Lifeline 2, this is Rescue 1. We have visual on the package. Moving to pickup now. Copy Rescue 1. Be advised, multiple hostile vehicles at my position. You will be taking fire on approach. Roger, gunships are with us. Marking your position now. Reyna popped an infrared strobe from her vest and activated it. Visible only through night vision, it would tell the helicopter gunships where friendly forces were located. She heard the rotors before she saw them. Attack helicopters coming in fast and low, their chin-mounted cannons already tracking targets. The valley erupted in fire and thunder. The helicopters engaged the vehicles with devastating precision, 30-millimeter rounds shredding metal and flesh. The few fighters who survived the initial attack scattered into the darkness, abandoning their vehicles and wounded. The pursuit was over. Lifeline 2, Rescue 1. Package is secure and loading now. What is your position for pickup? Reyna checked her map coordinates and called them in. 3 minutes later, a Black Hawk settled onto a relatively flat section of the mountainside, rotors whipping up dust and loose rock. She ran for the open door, threw herself inside, and the helicopter lifted immediately. Hayes was strapped into a seat, a medic already working on his injuries. He looked up when Reyna boarded, his face a mess of bruises and dried blood, but his eyes clear and focused. His hands were finally free of the rope that had bound them. Specialist Ortiz, he said over the rotor noise. Sir, Reyna responded. That was some exceptional shooting. Just doing what you said I was capable of, sir. Someone had to prove you right. Hayes smiled despite what had to be significant pain. Remind me never to doubt you again. The flight back to FOB Cushman took 40 minutes. Reyna spent most of it treating Hayes' injuries while the helicopter medic assisted. 2 cracked ribs, multiple contusions, a deep laceration above his left eye that needed stitches, severe dehydration, and rope burns on both wrists that had become infected. Nothing life-threatening, but enough damage to put most people in a hospital bed for a week. Hayes endured the treatment without complaint, watching Reyna work with an expression she could not quite read. When she finished the field dressing on his wrists, he caught her hand. How many? He asked quietly. Sir, how many shots did you take? I counted at least 12 impacts before I got my hands on a weapon. 15 total, Reyna said. 15 targets eliminated, plus 4 more during the pursuit delay. 19 confirmed kills in less than 20 minutes. Hayes shook his head slowly. And the Army had you running sick call. The Army made the assignment they thought was appropriate, sir. The Army was wrong. Hayes released her hand and leaned back against the helicopter's frame. I read your designated marksman training file after I requested you for my company. Do you know what Sergeant Major Hollis wrote in your evaluation? No, sir. He wrote that you were the most naturally gifted shooter he had trained in 25 years, that your fundamentals were textbook perfect and your tactical judgment was beyond your experience level. He recommended you for advanced sniper training. Hayes paused. Then someone in the chain decided that recommendation was inconvenient and buried it under a medical reclass that you never requested. Raina said nothing. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed brought a familiar anger to the surface. I tried to get you reassigned when I took command, Hayes continued. Lieutenant Voss fought me on it. Said it would be disruptive to unit cohesion. Said your medical skills were too valuable to waste on a specialty that had questionable utility for a female soldier. His words, not mine. The helicopter began its descent toward the FOB. Through the open door, Raina could see the base coming into view, the lights bright against the surrounding darkness. Home, except it did not feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where her abilities had been systematically suppressed because they made people uncomfortable. When we land, Hayes said, there's going to be a reckoning. Voss will try to bury this. He will claim you disobeyed orders and conducted an unauthorized operation. He will push for disciplinary action, maybe even a court-martial. I know, sir. I accepted that possibility when I left the wire. Hayes met her eyes. You're not facing this alone, specialist. I will testify to every detail of what happened. The sabotaged rescue attempt. The refusal to act on good intelligence. The pattern of obstruction. Voss wanted me dead or missing so he could take command without competition. That ends tonight. The helicopter touched down on the landing pad. Medical personnel rushed forward with a stretcher, but Hayes waved them off, insisting on walking under his own power. Raina stayed close, ready to catch him if his injuries proved more serious than his pride would admit. Lieutenant Voss was waiting at the edge of the pad, his face illuminated by the landing lights. Behind him stood Gunnery Sergeant Walsh, Sergeant Chun, and what looked like half the battalion command staff. Someone had clearly spread the word that Hayes was coming back alive. Captain Hayes, Voss said, his voice carefully neutral. Thank God you are safe. We have been organizing search efforts since the failed rescue attempt. Hayes stopped 3 feet from Voss, swaying slightly but staying upright. Is that what you call it, Lieutenant? A failed rescue attempt? Because from my perspective, it looked more like a deliberately sabotaged operation designed to ensure I stayed missing. Sir, I do not know what you are implying, but I am implying nothing. Hayes cut him off. I am stating facts. You provided incomplete intelligence to the rescue team. You refused to act on verified information about my location. You actively blocked one of the most capable soldiers in this battalion from participating in operations because her competence threatened your authority. Voss's face flushed red. Captain, you have been through a traumatic experience. Perhaps we should continue this conversation after you have received proper medical attention and had time to. Specialist Ortiz, Hayes said, ignoring Voss completely. Please tell the assembled leadership what you did tonight. Raina stood at attention. Sir, I conducted an unauthorized solo rescue operation. I infiltrated enemy territory, established an overwatch position, and eliminated 15 hostile combatants to facilitate Captain Hayes' extraction. I acted without orders and in direct violation of Lieutenant Voss's command authority. The gathered officers and NCOs stared at her in stunned silence. Voss recovered first, seizing on her admission. There you have it. A clear violation of a uniform code of military justice. Specialist Ortiz will be placed under arrest pending court-martial for, on whose authority, a new voice interrupted. Colonel Briggs, the battalion commander, stepped forward from the group. Voss had not noticed him in the crowd. Lieutenant Voss, are you seriously recommending we court-martial a soldier who just saved our company commander's life? Sir, regulations are clear. Unauthorized operations, failure to obey direct orders, are secondary to mission accomplishment, Briggs said coldly. Captain Hayes is alive, because Specialist Ortiz had the courage and capability to do what our official rescue attempt failed to achieve. He turned to Hayes. "Captain, I want a full debrief in my office in 1 hour. I want to know everything about this rescue and everything that led up to it." "Yes, sir," Hayes said. Briggs looked at Voss. "Lieutenant, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. Gunnery Sergeant Walsh will assume your responsibilities. You will make yourself available for questioning, and you will not leave this base without my explicit authorization." "Sir, I must protest." Protest noted and dismissed. Briggs gestured to 2 MPs who had materialized from the crowd. "Escort Lieutenant Voss to his quarters and ensure he stays there." As Voss was led away, his expression cycling between rage and disbelief, Walsh approached Hayes and Reyna. "Sir, the entire company has been waiting for word. They're going to want to hear that you are back." Hayes nodded. "Assemble them in the dining facility. 10 minutes. He looked at Reyna. "You will be there too, Specialist. They need to see the person who brought me home." The dining facility was packed when they arrived. Every soldier who was not on duty had crammed inside, standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting. When Hayes walked in with Reyna beside him, the room erupted in cheers. Someone started clapping, and within seconds the entire company was applauding, the sound echoing off the plywood walls. Hayes raised his hand for quiet. It took a minute for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "Most of you know what happened. I was captured during an ambush 4 days ago. The official rescue attempt failed. I was scheduled to be executed at dawn this morning." He paused, looking around at his soldiers. "I am standing here because one person refused to accept that outcome. Specialist Reyna Ortiz conducted a solo infiltration of a fortified enemy compound, eliminated 15 armed hostiles with precision rifle fire, and provided tactical overwatch during my extraction. She did this knowing she would face disciplinary action. She did it because it was the right thing to do." The room was silent now. Everyone focused on Hayes' words. "Some of you may know that Specialist Ortiz was trained as a designated marksman before being reclassified to medical. What you may not know is that she is one of the most skilled shooters I have ever served with. Tonight, she proved what I have been trying to tell Command for months. We have been wasting her talents because of outdated assumptions about what roles women should fill in combat operations." Hayes turned to face Reyna directly. "Specialist Ortiz, you saved my life. You did so with extraordinary skill and courage. This company and this army are better because you refuse to accept limitations that others try to place on you. Thank you." He saluted her formally. Reyna returned the salute, feeling the weight of 300 eyes watching the moment. Then the room erupted again, soldiers surging forward to shake her hand, pat her shoulder, offer congratulations and respect. Staff Sergeant Ramirez pushed through the crowd. "I knew you had it in you, Ortiz. Told you that your skills should not be wasted." Corporal Davies was there too, the butterfly closures still on the cut above his eye. "You saved the captain. You are a hero." Sergeant Shun appeared at her elbow, grinning. "Told you could pull it off. Exceptional work, Specialist." The celebration continued for another 30 minutes before Colonel Briggs arrived and called Hayes away for the promised debrief. Walsh pulled Reyna aside and walked her back toward the aid station. "You know there is going to be an investigation," Walsh said quietly. "They will want statements, documentation, everything. Voss is not going to go down without a fight." "I understand, Gunny." Walsh stopped walking and looked at her seriously. "What you did was extraordinary, but it was also extremely risky and technically illegal. If Voss had not been dirty, if the circumstances had been different, you would be facing a court-martial right now. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Gunny, but I would do it again." Walsh nodded slowly. "I know you would. That is what makes you dangerous. In the best possible way." He resumed walking. "The colonel is going to want your statement tomorrow. Get some sleep. You have earned it." Reyna returned to her quarters and sat on her bunk, still wearing her dusty field uniform, her rifle still slung across her back. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She had been awake for more than 36 hours, had climbed mountains, had taken 19 lives, had saved one. She thought about her grandfather, about the lessons he had taught her on that Texas range. Shooting is not about killing, Mija. It is about protecting. Tonight, she had done both. The killing had been necessary to accomplish the protecting. She felt no joy in it, but no guilt either. Just the quiet certainty that she had made the right choice. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Captain Hayes, freshly bandaged and wearing clean utilities. "Sir, you should be in medical." "I should be a lot of things," Hayes said, "but right now I need to be here." He held out a folder. "This is my official recommendation that you be awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism in combat. It is also my formal request that you be immediately reinstated to designated marksman status with an assignment to a tactical operations unit that will actually use your skills. Sir, you proved tonight that the Army made a mistake when they reclassified you," Hayes continued. "I'm not going to let that mistake stand. You are too valuable to waste on sick call." He paused. "Unless you want to stay medical. It is your choice, specialist. Not mine. Not Voss's. Not anyone else's. Yours." Reyna took the folder and looked at the man she had risked everything to save. "What do you think I should do, sir?" Hayes smiled despite the bruises. "I think you should do what you were born to do. Protect people, whether that is with a med kit or a rifle or both. The how does not matter as much as the why. Then I choose both, sir. Medic and marksman. Because sometimes protecting people means treating wounds, and sometimes it means preventing them." The investigation took 3 weeks. Reyna spent most of that time giving statements, answering questions, and continuing her normal duties at the aid station while the military bureaucracy processed what had happened. Colonel Briggs had made it clear she was not under any form of restriction, but she could feel the weight of scrutiny every time a senior officer entered the room. Sergeant Chun kept her updated on the investigation's progress. They found everything, he told her one afternoon in the aid station. Voss had been systematically blocking your transfer requests for months. Hayes had submitted 3 separate recommendations to get you into tactical operations. Voss buried all of them. Chun shook his head. They also found communication logs showing Voss delayed passing intelligence about Hayes' location to the rescue team. He wanted that mission to fail. "Is that enough for charges?" Reyna asked. "More than enough." Chun handed her a printed document. "Court-martial proceedings start next week. Dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming an officer, and willful obstruction of a rescue operation. He is looking at a dishonorable discharge and possible prison time." Reyna read through the charges. Part of her felt satisfaction at seeing Voss held accountable. Another part just felt tired. All of this could have been avoided if people had been willing to look past their assumptions about what she was capable of. "The investigation also cleared you completely," Chun added. "Colonel Briggs ruled that your actions, while technically unauthorized, were justified by the circumstances and resulted in mission success with 0 friendly casualties. You are not facing any disciplinary action." "That is good to hear," Reyna said. "Better than good." Chun smiled. "The Silver Star recommendation went through. You're getting a formal ceremony next Friday. Full battalion formation. The works." The ceremony was held on a clear morning with the mountains visible in the distance. The entire battalion stood in formation, hundreds of soldiers in dress uniforms despite the dust and heat. Reyna stood at attention beside Captain Hayes, who had recovered enough to return to duty, though he still moved carefully around his healing ribs. Colonel Briggs stepped forward with the medal case and began reading the citation. "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. Specialist Reyna Ortiz distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous actions while conducting a solo rescue operation to recover a captured American officer from hostile forces." The citation continued, detailing the infiltration, the precision shooting, the tactical decisions that had led to Hayes' successful extraction. Reyna stood motionless, listening to her actions described in the formal language of military awards, thinking about how strange it was to be recognized for something that had felt so necessary at the time. Specialist Ortiz displayed incredible courage, technical skill, and tactical acumen. Her actions directly resulted in the preservation of American life, and denied the enemy a significant propaganda victory. Her performance reflects great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. Briggs pinned the Silver Star on her uniform and stepped back to salute. Reyna returned the salute crisply. The battalion erupted in applause, the sound carrying across the base. She caught sight of Staff Sergeant Ramirez in the crowd, grinning and clapping loudly. Gunnery Sergeant Walsh stood at attention, but his expression was one of unmistakable pride. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the dining facility. Soldiers lined up to congratulate her, shake her hand, ask questions about the mission. Reyna answered as best she could, still uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its importance. These soldiers needed heroes. They needed to believe that courage and skill mattered, that the system would eventually recognize merit over politics. Hayes found her near the end of the reception, after most of the crowd had dispersed. "Walk with me," he said. They left the dining facility and walked toward the perimeter, stopping at a spot where they could see the mountains to the north. The same mountains where Reyna had spent 16 hours in a hide position, where she had made shots that changed her life. "I've been thinking about what you said," Hayes began, "about choosing to be both medic and marksman. Sir, the Army has a problem with specialists. We train people to do one thing exceptionally well, but we lose the value of cross-functional capabilities. You proved that someone can be an expert medic and an expert shooter, that those skills complement each other rather than compete. I just used what I was trained to do, sir." Hayes shook his head. "You did more than that. You saw a problem the system could not or would not solve, and you fixed it using every tool at your disposal. That is not following training. That is leadership." He pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. "I've been working on something. A proposal for a new training program. Combat medics with advanced designated marksman qualifications. Small unit medical specialists who can also provide precision fire support. The pilot program would train 12 soldiers in the first iteration." He handed her the folder. "I want you to lead the instruction." Reyna opened the folder and scanned the proposal. It was comprehensive, detailed, exactly the kind of program that would have allowed her to develop both skill sets from the beginning instead of being forced to choose. "Sir, this is ambitious. Getting approval for a new training program is already in progress. Briggs supports it. So does the division commander. Your rescue operation gave them the proof of concept they needed." Hay smiled. "Turns out rescuing a company commander and getting a Silver Star in the process gives you significant institutional credibility." "When would this start?" Reyna asked. 3 months. Enough time to develop the curriculum, select candidates, and set up the training infrastructure. You would hold instructor status, probably pick up sergeant in the process. It would mean leaving this unit, but staying in Afghanistan for another rotation. Reyna looked at the mountains, thinking about what Hayes was offering. A chance to train others the way she wished she had been trained. A chance to prove that the false choice between medic and marksman was never necessary. A chance to build something that would outlast her own service. "I accept, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank me by making it work." Hayes turned to face her directly. "You changed my life, specialist. You saved it, obviously, but more than that. You show me that my instincts about your capabilities were correct, that fighting the system for the right reasons can produce results. I'm not going to forget that. I was just doing what you taught me to believe I could do, sir." Then we both learned something. Hayes extended his hand. "To the future, Specialist Ortiz. May it be worthy of your capabilities." They shook hands as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. In the distance, a patrol was preparing to roll out, soldiers checking weapons and equipment with the routine precision that came from repetition. Life on the FOB continued its normal rhythm, operations and missions, and the daily business of war. But something had changed. Reyna could feel it in the way soldiers nodded to her as they passed, in a respect that had replaced the dismissiveness she had grown accustomed to. She had proven herself in the most definitive way possible, not with words or promises, but with actions that spoke louder than any evaluation or recommendation letter. The following week, Lieutenant Voss's court-martial concluded. Guilty on all charges. Dishonorable discharge. 2 years in military prison. The sentence was read in a small courtroom with minimal attendance, nothing like the ceremony that had celebrated Reyna's actions. Voss had stood at attention as his career ended, his expression bitter and defeated. Reyna did not attend the sentencing. She had moved past anger into something more productive. Voss had tried to limit her because of his own insecurities and prejudices. He had failed. That was consequence enough. She had more important things to focus on than watching someone face the results of their choices. She spent her evenings planning the training curriculum, working with Hayes and several senior NCOs to develop a program that would challenge candidates without breaking them. The goal was not to create super soldiers, but to expand the tactical toolkit available to small units. A medic who could provide precision fire support. A marksman who could stabilize casualties. Someone who understood that protecting people sometimes required a scalpel and sometimes required a rifle. Staff Sergeant Ramirez found her in the aid station one night, reviewing medical protocols for the new program. You know you're going to change the whole system, right? Once this program proves itself, every combat unit is going to want these dual-qualified specialists. That is the idea, Reyna said. Make capabilities more important than categories. Your grandfather will be proud, Ramirez said quietly. You took what he taught you and turned it into something bigger than yourself. Reyna thought about her grandfather, about the hours on the Texas range, the lessons about protection and purpose, and using skills for something that mattered. I hope so. He always said the weapon did not matter as much as the reason you picked it up. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Reyna closed her notebook and looked at Ramirez. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for believing I could do this before I proved it. I just recognized talent when I saw it. The rest was all you. After he left, Reyna walked outside and looked at the stars, brilliant in the clear Afghan sky. 3 weeks ago, she had been lying under these same stars, preparing to risk everything for one person. Now she was preparing to train others, to pass on skills and philosophy and the understanding that limitations were often imposed by others but could be overcome by choice. She thought about Hayes, recovering in his quarters and planning the operations that would keep his soldiers safe. She thought about the 12 candidates who would eventually go through the training program, learning to be both healers and protectors. She thought about all the future missions where having both capabilities might mean the difference between success and failure, between lives saved and lives lost. The path forward was clear now. Not easy, but clear. Reyna Ortiz had spent years being told what she could not do, what she should not attempt, where she did not belong. She had proven all of those limitations false. Now it was time to help others do the same. 3 months later, Sergeant Reyna Ortiz stood on the range at Forward Operating Base Lightning, watching 12 soldiers settle into shooting positions. The promotion had come through 2 weeks after the Silver Star ceremony, along with orders transferring her to the newly established Combat Medic Designated Marksman program. She wore her new rank with quiet pride, knowing she had earned it through competence rather than time and service. The 12 candidates sprawled before her were a mix of experienced medics seeking additional skills and junior soldiers selected for their potential. 3 were women, a detail that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Times were changing, slowly but measurably. Reyna was part of that change. Control your breathing, she called out. The shot breaks between heartbeats, in that moment when your body is perfectly still. Do not anticipate the recoil. Let the weapon surprise you. She walked down the line, observing each candidate's position, making small corrections. A shifted elbow here, a relaxed grip there. The fundamentals her grandfather had drilled into her, now being passed to the next generation. Private Chun, your cheek weld is inconsistent. Press firmly against the stock. Specialist Morrison, you are muscling the rifle. Relax and let the bone structure do the work. The candidates fired in sequence, the suppressed rifles producing muted cracks that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Reyna moved behind them with a spotting scope, calling corrections and noting who adapted quickly versus who needed additional instruction. This was her world now. Not just taking shots herself, but teaching others to make them. Not just saving lives in the moment, but creating capabilities that would save lives for years to come. After the range session, she conducted medical training in the classroom. Trauma care under fire. Tourniquet application with one hand. Making triage decisions when resources were limited and every second mattered. The candidates were exhausted, pushed to their limits by the dual demands of the program. That was intentional. The battlefield would not care if they were tired. Neither would she. Captain Hayes appeared at the classroom door near the end of the session. Reyna wrapped up the lecture and dismissed the candidates, then joined Hayes outside. They walked toward the operations center. The afternoon sun warmed despite the approaching winter. How is the first class progressing? Hayes asked. Better than expected, Reyna said. Private Chun has exceptional shooting fundamentals. Specialist Morrison is a natural medic who is learning the marksman's skills quickly. Corporal Davis struggles with the precision shooting, but his trauma care is outstanding. They will all graduate if they maintain their current trajectory. The program has drawn attention at division level. Hayes smiled. They want to expand it. Double the class size for the next iteration. Add advanced trauma care and counter-sniper tactics to the curriculum. That is ambitious, sir. So is a solo rescue operation against 15 armed hostiles. You have proven that ambitious works when the foundation is solid. Hayes stopped walking and turned to face her. I have new orders, Sergeant. Transferring back to the States in 2 weeks. Taking a position at the infantry school, developing doctrine for small unit operations. Congratulations, sir. That is well deserved. Thank you. But it means I will not be here to see this program continue growing. Hayes extended his hand. You're going to have to carry it forward without me. I will do my best, sir. Reyna shook his hand firmly. Thank you for believing in this. For believing in me. You made it easy. Hayes released her hand, but held her gaze. When I was in that compound, waiting for execution, I thought about a lot of things. My family, my career, the soldiers I had served with. And I thought about you, about the potential I had seen that the system was wasting. I am grateful I survived to see that potential realized. Not just for my sake, for everyone who will benefit from what you are building here. You gave me the chance to prove what I could do, sir. I will not waste it. I know you will not. Hayes glanced at his watch. I have a meeting with the battalion commander. Keep pushing those candidates hard, Sergeant. Make them earn this. After he left, Reyna stood alone for a moment, processing the conversation. Hayes was leaving. The officer who had advocated for her, who had documented her capabilities when others dismissed them, who had given her the opportunity to become what she was meant to be. It felt like the end of something important, but it was also the beginning of something new. She was no longer dependent on his advocacy. She had proven herself. The program would continue because it worked, not because Hayes championed it. That evening, Reyna conducted special instruction for the 3 female candidates. They had requested additional time on the range, wanting to ensure they exceeded the standards rather than merely meeting them. She understood that pressure, the need to be undeniably excellent, because anything less would be used as evidence that women did not belong. They shot until the light failed, working through magazine after magazine, refining technique and building confidence. Private Chun in particular showed remarkable improvement, her shot groups tightening with each iteration. Corporal Williams struggled more, but refused to quit, her determination overriding her frustration. When they finally packed up their gear, Williams approached Reyna hesitantly. Sergeant, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you deal with it? The doubt. The people who thought you did not belong. Williams looked down at her rifle. I hear what some of the male soldiers say, that we only got selected for the program because of politics, that we are diversity checkboxes instead of real candidates. Reyna remembered hearing similar comments about herself, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the casual dismissals disguised as concern. You deal with it by being so good they cannot ignore you, by making every shot count, by proving through actions that their assumptions were wrong. But what if I fail? Williams asked quietly. What if I wash out and prove them right? Then you fail having tried your best. Reyna put a hand on the younger soldier's shoulder. But failure is not predetermined because you are a woman. It is only guaranteed if you let their doubt become your doubt. You were selected because you have the aptitude and the dedication. Now you prove you also have the skill and the heart." Williams nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you, Sergeant, for showing us it is possible." After the candidates left, Reyna remained on the range alone, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She thought about her grandfather, about the promise she had made to use her skills to protect people. She was doing that now, not just through her own actions, but by creating others who would carry that mission forward. A week later, Captain Hayes held a small farewell gathering in the dining facility. The company turned out to wish him well, to thank him for his leadership, to acknowledge the respect he had earned through competence and character. When it came time for speeches, Hayes called Reyna forward. "Most of you know that Sergeant Ortiz saved my life," Hayes said to the assembled soldiers. "What you might not know is that she also saved something more important. She saved the idea that merit should triumph over prejudice, that capabilities matter more than categories, that we become stronger as an army when we recognize talent wherever it exists and develop it without artificial limitations." He turned to Reyna. "You changed my perspective, Sergeant. You taught me that my instincts about your potential were correct, but my approach to developing that potential was too constrained by existing systems. You show me that sometimes the best way to serve is to break the rules that prevent good people from succeeding. I am grateful for that lesson." The company applauded. Reyna accepted a plaque commemorating Hayes' command, shook his hand one final time, and watched him leave the dining facility surrounded by well-wishers. An era had ended. She was ready for what came next. 2 days after Hayes departed, Reyna led her candidates on their first tactical exercise, a simulated casualty rescue under fire, combining their medical and marksman training into a single integrated operation. They moved through the scenario with growing confidence, applying tourniquets under time pressure, providing covering fire from supported positions, communicating effectively despite the chaos. When the exercise concluded, Reyna gathered them for the after-action review. "You performed well, better than I expected for your first integrated scenario. But there were errors. Specialist Morrison, you broke cover before confirming the threat was neutralized. Private Chun, your trauma care was excellent, but you forgot to call on the medical evacuation. Corporal Williams, you hesitated on the shot that would have prevented the scenario casualty from taking additional fire." She went through each mistake, explaining not just what was wrong, but why it mattered and how to correct it. This was teaching, not just demonstrating skill, but transferring knowledge, building capability, creating the next generation of dual-qualified specialists who would carry the mission forward long after she was gone. A month later, the first class graduated. All 12 candidates passed the final evaluations, earning both their advanced medical certifications and their designated marksman qualifications. Reyna stood at attention as Colonel Briggs presented each graduate with their credentials, pride swelling in her chest at what they had accomplished. After the ceremony, she found a quiet spot near the perimeter and pulled out the letter she had been writing to her mother. She described the program, the graduates, the way the Army was slowly recognizing that artificial limitations helped no one. She described the Silver Star ceremony, Hayes' departure, the satisfaction of teaching others what her grandfather had taught her. At the end of the letter, she added a final paragraph. "Grandpa used to say that shooting was not about killing, but about protecting. I understand that now more than ever. Every person I train is someone who will save lives. Every skill I pass on is another tool that will keep soldiers alive in situations where seconds matter. I'm doing what he taught me, Mama, using what I know to protect people. I think he would be proud." She sealed the letter and walked to the mail center to send it. On the way back, she encountered Staff Sergeant Ramirez, who was reviewing patrol schedules. "Sergeant Ortiz," he said with a grin, "heard you are finally getting some field time. Patrol rotation has you going out tomorrow." "About time," Reyna said. "I have been training others for so long, I'm starting to forget what it feels like to actually do the mission." The next morning, she loaded into a Humvee with a mixed patrol of infantry and scouts. Her aid bag was fully stocked. Her rifle was cleaned and zeroed. She was both medic and marksman, healer and protector, ready to serve in whatever capacity the mission required. The patrol moved through the valley without incident, checking on local villages and gathering intelligence. When they stopped at a small clinic, Reyna treated several children with minor illnesses while other soldiers provided security. When they established an overwatch position on a ridgeline, she glassed the surrounding terrain with her scope, providing early warning of potential threats. As the sun set and they prepared to return to base, Reyna stood on that ridgeline and looked at the mountains where she had once spent 16 hours in a high position, where she had taken 19 shots that changed her life. The memory was still vivid, but it no longer defined her. She had moved beyond that single moment into something larger, a career built on competence, a program that would outlast her service, a legacy of teaching others to protect people using every skill available. The patrol loaded up and headed home. Reyna rode in comfortable silence, her rifle across her lap, her aid bag at her feet, both tools equally important, both capabilities equally valued. She had found her place, not in spite of being both medic and marksman, but because of it. The journey from dismissed potential to realized capability was complete. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you have had a similar situation happen to you before where you had to prove yourself against doubt. She was Sergeant Reyna Ortiz, combat medic, designated marksman, instructor, protector, and she was exactly where she belonged.